February 20, 1943. Northern Tunisia. At dawn, German tank commanders near Kasserine Pass witnessed something that made no sense, something no after-action report could ever explain. Out of the dust and shattered hills came American Sherman tanks that should not have been able to coordinate. The terrain broke their line of sight. Smoke swallowed landmarks. No signal flags waved. No flares burst overhead. No messengers sprinted between vehicles. And yet, 5 Shermans moved as if guided by a single mind. They appeared from different directions at precisely the right moments. One tank covered an approach it could not see. Another advanced exactly when a third halted. Each crew behaved as though they knew, with absolute certainty, where the others were, despite having no visual contact at all. To the German panzer crews, it felt unnatural. Almost eerie. Inside their Panzer IVs, commanders fought their own machines. Static flooded their headsets. Engines drowned out voices. Orders dissolved into noise. Even tanks equipped with the latest German FUG radio struggled to communicate beyond a few hundred meters while moving. Many could not transmit at all, only listen, silently, helplessly. What the Germans didn't know was that they were no longer fighting tanks. They were fighting a network. Every American Sherman on that battlefield was linked by invisible threads, clear, uninterrupted voices traveling through frequency modulation radios the Wehrmacht had never encountered. 25 watts of power. Crystal-controlled precision. Communication that cut through chaos like a blade. 8,000 miles from Detroit's factory floors, the most decisive advantage of World War II was revealing itself, not in thicker armor or larger guns, but in electromagnetic waves no one could see. The age of connected warfare had begun. What German commanders first sensed as an oddity soon revealed itself as a fatal weakness. Against American armor, hierarchy no longer mattered. Every U.S. tank could command. Every crew could report. Every vehicle could react. When one tank was knocked out, nothing collapsed. The network simply routed around the loss. This became unmistakably clear during the Battle of Kasserine Pass, February 14 to 24, 1943, the first large-scale clash between American armored forces and veteran Wehrmacht units. On paper, the battle favored Germany. The Afrika Korps inflicted heavy losses and forced U.S. withdrawals. But beneath the tactical outcome, something far more important was happening. Across nearly 50 miles of broken desert, scattered elements of the U.S. 1st Armored Division continued to fight as a coordinated force. Tank crews who had never trained together shared enemy sightings, adjusted routes, and redirected attacks in real time. Crews under fire warned others of hidden anti-tank guns. Platoons low on ammunition rerouted before being trapped. Artillery fire was requested, corrected, and read-asked by tank commanders speaking calmly through clear FM channels, often while moving at speed. German signals intelligence officers listening in were deeply unsettled. Intercepted American transmissions were clean, continuous, and disciplined. Orders were exchanged conversationally, not repeated desperately through static. Reports arrived from multiple tanks at once. Worse still, it appeared that every Sherman could transmit. There were no obvious command vehicles to target, no forest of antennas to aim for. A report from the 10th Panzer Division's intelligence section noted that American units maintained effective radio contact at distances where German sets produced nothing but noise. In contrast, German FUG-5 radios, still relying on amplitude modulation, struggled under combat conditions. Their 10-watt transmitters, adequate on test ranges, collapsed in the real world. Movement reduced range dramatically. Dust, vibration, and electrical interference drowned signals. Entire platoons went silent the moment terrain or smoke intervened. The consequences were brutal. When German command tanks were hit, coordination vanished. Subordinate crews, unable to transmit, could neither warn others nor adapt. Orders arrived late, or not at all. By September 1943, American armor landed in Italy, where logic suggested radios would matter less. Mountains, valleys, and stone villages had historically neutralized communication advantages. Instead, the opposite occurred. In the rugged Italian terrain, FM radios proved decisive. Where German AM systems echoed, distorted, or failed completely, American SCR 508 sets cut through reflections and signal overlap caused by mountain walls. Tank units separated by ridgelines coordinated flanking maneuvers without ever seeing one another. In valleys where visual signals were impossible and runners would be killed, American armor moved with precision. During the grinding advance toward Monte Cassino, German observers again reported coordination that defied their understanding. Platoons attacked in synchronized waves across terrain German doctrine insisted required direct visual control. After-action reports from the U.S. 1st Armored Division described routine communication at ranges where German radios were effectively useless. Then came June 6, 1944. As Sherman tanks rolled down ramps onto the beaches of Normandy, their radios immediately linked them to naval gunfire controllers offshore. Requests for fire support passed seamlessly from tank commanders to ships miles away, something entirely beyond German capability. But Normandy exposed a flaw. Tank radios could not communicate directly with infantry radios. American infantry carried SCR 300 sets operating on entirely different frequencies. In the hedgerows of the bocage, this gap proved deadly. German infantry armed with panzerfausts crept through sunken lanes and brush. American tanks advanced blind, unaware of threats only meters away, while nearby infantry had no way to warn them. The solution came not from laboratories, but from welding torches. Tank crews mounted EE-8 field telephones in armored boxes welded to the rear of their Shermans, wired directly into the tank's internal communications. Infantrymen could now plug in under fire and speak directly to the crew inside. By Operation Cobra, late July 1944, this improvised innovation transformed combined arms warfare. From July 25 to 30th, Cobra unleashed the full power of American radio superiority. The 2nd Armored Division, under Major General Edward H. Brooks, maneuvered more than 200 Sherman tanks through an integrated radio network that allowed real-time battlefield control on a scale never before achieved. German defenders from the Panzerlehr Division faced an enemy that seemed omniscient. American tanks reacted instantly to threats reported miles away. Ambushes were bypassed before they closed. Artillery strikes arrived within minutes of target identification, adjusted live by tank commanders watching impacts through gun sights. Panzerlehr, once Germany's showcase armored division, had been reduced to communication poverty. Many tanks operated with no radios at all. Others relied on sets crippled by interference and terrain. Visual signals were useless in hedgerows where visibility rarely exceeded 100 meters. The irony was crushing. Germany had pioneered armored radio warfare. Heinz Guderian, architect of Blitzkrieg, had demanded radios in tanks since the 1920s. His 1937 book Achtung Panzer declared communication the lifeblood of armored operations. He was right. But by 1943, German industry could no longer supply the radios his doctrine required, and the battlefield was already passing them by. The war had entered an age where steel no longer decided battles alone. The side that controlled the airwaves controlled the fight. By 1943, Germany's armored force was facing a contradiction it could not escape. That year, German factories produced roughly 5,700 medium tanks. Yet fewer than 2,000 modern FUG-V transceivers left production lines. Radios were reserved for command vehicles, assault guns, and priority units. Ordinary tank crews went to war with engines and guns, but no voice. Entire German formations advanced blind. The situation elsewhere was even worse. The Soviet Union, despite producing tanks in unmatched numbers, entered the war with almost no effective radio infrastructure. The legendary T-34, the most numerous Allied tank of the war, usually went into combat completely silent. Soviet doctrine depended on prearranged plans, colored flags, and visual cues, methods that collapsed under fire. In 1941, this communication poverty proved catastrophic. By 1943, Lend-Lease aid began to ease the problem. American radio sets, many identical to those installed in Sherman tanks, were allocated to Soviet command vehicles. But even at the war's end, only 1 in 4 Soviet tanks carried any radio at all. The contrast was stark. While Germany and the Soviet Union struggled to equip fractions of their armored forces, the United States achieved something unprecedented: every single medium tank went to war with a sophisticated FM radio. That achievement began far from the battlefield, inside Motorola's Chicago factories. Before the war, the company produced civilian car radios. Converting to military production required complete reinvention. Assembly lines were rebuilt. Tolerances tightened. New testing methods were invented almost from scratch. Each SCR 508 radio set was a technical monster for its time, 2,748 individual components, all manufactured to exacting standards. The BC 604 transmitter alone contained hundreds of capacitors and resistors. Crystal oscillators had to hold precise frequencies while enduring freezing nights, desert heat, constant vibration, and artillery shock. The scale of production tells the story of American industrial power. 1942, 3,800 tank radio sets. 1943, 11,400 sets. 1944, over 24,000 sets. By the end of the war, more than 50,000 tank radios had been produced, enough to equip every one of the 49,324 Sherman tanks built during the conflict. No other nation came close. The SCR 508's superiority extended far beyond clarity of signal. Its crystal-controlled tuning allowed crews to preset channels before battle and trust they would remain locked in alignment despite movement and combat shock. German FUG radios relied on variable tuning systems that drifted constantly, forcing crews to retune under fire. The American system's dual receivers allowed tank commanders to listen to both their platoon network and company command net simultaneously. Orders flowed downward instantly, while information flowed upward just as fast. Situational awareness became continuous, not episodic. Inside the tank, the advantage continued. The BC 606 intercom connected every crew member. Gunners, loaders, and drivers could warn the commander of threats the moment they appeared. Throat microphones and noise-canceling headsets made conversation possible even as engines roared and shells struck armor. Many German tanks lacked intercoms entirely. Crews resorted to kicking shoulders, tugging clothing, or shouting, methods that broke down in combat chaos. Even power mattered. The SCR 508 could operate on either 12 or 24 volts, automatically adapting to the vehicle. Its dynamotor power supply filtered electrical noise before it reached the radio. German sets drew power directly from vehicle systems, turning every spark plug into interference. This universal, reliable communication transformed how American armored forces fought. U.S. doctrine abandoned rigid formations in favor of combat commands, flexible, mission-specific task forces assembled on the fly. Tank units, tank destroyers, infantry, engineers, and artillery could be mixed and matched, confident that their radios would link them into a single fighting organism. To German commanders, this flexibility was deeply confusing. Their doctrine required strict organization because their communications could not support improvisation. The battlefield consequences became clear at the Battle of Aricourt, September 1944. There, the U.S. 4th Armored Division faced newly formed German panzer brigades equipped with formidable Panther tanks, superior in armor and firepower. On paper, the Germans held every advantage. In practice, they were outmatched. American Shermans reported enemy movements the instant Panthers appeared. Tank destroyers received targeting data from units they could not see. Sherman command tanks called in artillery barrages within minutes, sometimes seconds, of contact. The German brigades were destroyed piecemeal, not because their tanks were inferior, but because they fought as isolated machines. The Americans fought as a connected system. By 1944, the outcome of armored combat was no longer decided by steel alone. It was decided by who could speak, who could hear, and who could react first. By the autumn of 1944, the numbers no longer made sense. At Aricourt, the U.S. 4th Armored Division annihilated German armored forces at a ratio that should have been impossible. 281 German vehicles destroyed. 41 Shermans lost. On paper, German Panthers and Panzer IVs were superior machines. On the battlefield, they were outmaneuvered, isolated, and defeated. German intelligence searched for explanations, and found the wrong ones. After-action reports praised American radio discipline and crew training, assuming coordination came from rigid procedures rather than superior technology. A captured intelligence summary from September 1944 concluded that American effectiveness was the result of experience and doctrine. The report never identified the true advantage. It never mentioned frequency modulation. It never mentioned universal radios. It never realized the enemy was fighting as a single, continuous system. As a result, German tactics never evolved. They continued hunting command tanks, aiming at vehicles with extra antennas, unaware that every Sherman was a command tank. Ambushes were planned on the assumption that American units would fragment once terrain broke visual contact. Instead, U.S. tanks disappeared behind hills and reappeared elsewhere, still coordinated, still informed, still lethal. By March 1945, as Allied forces closed on the Rhine, American communication superiority reached its peak. When elements of the 9th Armored Division reached Remagen and found the Ludendorff Bridge still standing, the difference between victory and delay was measured in minutes. A radio message crossed from the front line to 1st Army headquarters almost instantly. Within an hour, units across the entire sector were redirecting to exploit the opening. German forces never had a chance to respond. Their command system depended on fixed telephone lines, lines that Allied aircraft had been cutting for months. Orders traveled slowly, if at all. By the time German headquarters grasped the situation, American armor was already across the Rhine. At Remagen, American radios did more than transmit information, they created defense. Tank platoons from different battalions, units that had never trained together, formed a unified shield around the bridgehead. Fire missions were coordinated on the fly. German counterattacks arrived disjointed and out of sequence, stripped of surprise and crushed individually. The pattern repeated in April 1945, during the encirclement of the Ruhr pocket. American armored columns from the 1st and 9th Armies executed a complex double envelopment using radio coordination alone. No prearranged scripts. No rigid formations. Columns adjusted speed, direction, and objectives in real time, guided by continuous communication. Inside the pocket, 325,000 German soldiers found themselves trapped, not only by tanks and infantry, but by silence. American fighter bombers, directed by radio-equipped forward air controllers, systematically destroyed German communication centers. Headquarters lost contact with divisions. Divisions lost contact with regiments. Units fought on, but blindly. Field Marshal Walter Model's final messages before communications failed captured the collapse. No contact with adjacent units. No communication with higher headquarters. Operations continue, but coordination is impossible. For American tank crews, the psychological experience of war was fundamentally different. Even when surrounded, they were never truly alone. Voices filled their headsets, warnings, orders, reassurance. Help was always a transmission away. German crews endured the opposite reality. Engines roared in isolation. Orders arrived late or not at all. Each crew fought its own war inside a larger battle it could barely perceive. Ace tanker Otto Carius later described the strain of fighting under such conditions. Though he focused on tactics and survival, the silence between units haunted his accounts. Strategically, the implications were decisive. The rapid Allied advance in 1944–45 was not only a product of fuel and manpower, but of communication. Patton's Third Army raced across France sustained by radio networks that controlled forces spread across hundreds of miles, an operational tempo German commanders could neither match nor fully comprehend. Even Heinz Guderian, now Inspector General of Armored Troops, recognized the crisis. In a memorandum from December 1944, he admitted that American coordination negated Germany's technical advantages in armor and firepower. But by then, there was no solution left to implement. After the war, American technical intelligence teams confirmed what the battlefield had already proven. German tanks often carried excellent guns and thick armor, but their communication systems were fatally outdated. A U.S. Army technical report concluded that German armored communications lagged at least 5 years behind American systems. The absence of frequency modulation, the scarcity of radios, and poor electrical shielding created vulnerabilities no amount of bravery or tactics could overcome. Soviet evaluators reached the same conclusion. The outcome of armored warfare had changed forever. By 1945, victory belonged not to the side with the strongest tank, but to the side that could speak, hear, and act faster than its enemy. When the war ended and the wreckage was examined, the final verdict did not come from memoirs or battlefield myths, it came from engineers. The Red Army, granted access to captured German and Allied equipment, made a revealing decision. Instead of refining German radio systems, Soviet designers chose to study and replicate American communication architecture. The future, they concluded, did not belong to louder engines or thicker armor, but to reliable, universal connectivity. The production figures alone tell the story. The United States manufactured more than 50,000 SCR-508 series tank radios, enough to equip every one of the 49,324 Sherman tanks produced during the war. Not one unit was left voiceless. Each carried a 25-watt transmitter, crystal-controlled to maintain precise frequency stability under combat stress. Even while moving, Shermans could maintain contact at ranges approaching 7 miles, extending to 10 or more miles when stationary. No other nation approached this level of integration. Germany produced approximately 6,000 FUG-5 transceivers for nearly 12,000 medium and heavy tanks. Only about one-fifth of German armored vehicles carried full transmit and receive capability. Their radios transmitted at 10 watts, relied on unstable tuning, and lost effectiveness almost immediately when vehicles moved. The operational consequences were stark. American tank units could request artillery fire and receive it in 3 to 5 minutes. German units often waited 15 to 30 minutes, if requests could be transmitted at all. Every American tank could coordinate. Only a minority of German tanks could communicate beyond passive listening. This imbalance reshaped armored warfare. The principles established by the Sherman's radio suite became foundational doctrine. Modern main battle tanks carry digital communication systems far more advanced than the SCR-508, but philosophically identical. Universal installation. Reliable transmission. Shared situational awareness. The post-war Bundeswehr, rebuilt in the 1950s, absorbed the lesson completely. Every Leopard tank produced carried comprehensive communication systems from the outset. A Bundeswehr training manual later summarized the conclusion with brutal clarity. Information dominance outweighs platform superiority. History has repeatedly confirmed that judgment. In 1991, coalition forces in the Gulf War destroyed Iraqi armored units equipped with individually powerful Soviet-designed tanks, but crippled by inferior communications. In 2003, American forces again demonstrated that networked units defeat isolated ones, even when facing technically formidable equipment. The story of the Sherman tank's radio is not a footnote. It is the moment warfare crossed into the electromagnetic domain. German tank crews fought their war largely unaware of this revolution. They encountered it first as confusion, then as frustration, and finally as defeat. They never fully grasped why American units could coordinate without line of sight, why ambushes failed, or why command structures refused to collapse. Because every Sherman was more than a tank. It was a node. The SCR-508 radio transformed the M4 Sherman from an adequate fighting vehicle into a component of a vast, distributed weapons system, one that included every other American tank on the battlefield. This transformation proved more decisive than thicker armor or larger guns could ever have been. Victory did not ride solely in the Sherman's 75mm cannon or sloped steel. It rode in the 181 pounds of radio equipment bolted inside, equipment that connected crews into a shared intelligence greater than any individual machine. From Kasserine Pass, to Italy's mountains, through France's hedgerows, and into the heart of Germany itself, American tanks demonstrated coordination that German doctrine had declared impossible without visual control. The Wehrmacht never found an answer, because it never fully understood the question. A remark attributed to Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel at Germany's surrender captures the truth, whether precisely quoted or not. "We knew how to build better tanks. You knew how to make them work together." In the end, America did not merely build 49,324 Sherman tanks. It built 49,324 connected mines, the world's first armored battlefield network, and changed the nature of war forever. The revolution historians would later call network-centric warfare did not begin with satellites, computers, or digital maps. It began the moment the first Sherman tank equipped with an SCR-508 radio rolled into combat in 1942. From that instant, the logic of war shifted. Victory no longer belonged automatically to the side with thicker armor or larger guns. It belonged to the force that could see farther, react faster, and think collectively. The network defeated the platform. The connected overcame the isolated. This transformation unfolded almost invisibly to German commanders. They recognized American effectiveness on the battlefield, but misdiagnosed its cause. They saw coordination and assumed training. They saw speed and assumed doctrine. What they failed to grasp, until it was too late, was that every Sherman was talking, while most German tanks were silent. By the time German leadership understood that American armor possessed a universal communication advantage, the strategic balance had already tipped beyond recovery. This oversight ranks among the greatest intelligence failures of the Second World War. Again and again, German forces encountered American units that maneuvered with uncanny cohesion. Again and again, reports noted the phenomenon, and again, the implications were ignored. German industry continued to produce technically impressive tanks that entered battle as individuals. American industry produced adequate machines that entered battle as teams. And teams won. In the final accounting, it was not the German 88mm gun that decided the war in Europe. It was not sloped armor or muzzle velocity. It was the invisible battlefield, the electromagnetic spectrum, where American forces held overwhelming superiority. The SCR-508 radio carried no explosive charge. It pierced no armor. Yet it proved more lethal than any shell, because it allowed thousands of machines and men to function as a single organism. Information moved faster than steel. Decisions traveled faster than bullets. Across North Africa, Italy, France, and Germany, German tank crews learned this truth the hard way. They faced an enemy that did not fight tank against tank, but system against system. They were isolated nodes confronting a living network. The Sherman tank did not change warfare because it was the best tank of its era. It changed warfare because it connected. And in modern combat, that lesson remains unbroken. Those who are connected survive. Those who are isolated are defeated. The age of armored networks was born in 1942, and the world has been fighting in its shadow ever since.